When they came over the bluffs and saw this below, everybody, huge smiles, happiness. The two girls, Abbie, age 10, and her older sister, Eliza, age 11, they were pretty much giddy. After over 600 miles and a year and a half of living in a covered wagon like this one for most of the time, it felt like they were almost there.
I'm on the shores of the Mississippi River in Davenport, Iowa. And actually, across the river is Rock Island, Illinois. That's where the family, Gardner family, arrived late in the summer, early fall of 1854. A bridge was not built until 1855, after the Gardners had already passed through this area. So they would have had to take a ferry across the river from the Illinois side to the Iowa side.
The ferry might have looked something like this, or maybe bigger like this. But whatever, it had to be exciting for everyone. On the biggest boat maybe the children had ever seen, on the biggest river they had ever seen, and the whole family and their wagons and horses on that boat, chugging across the mighty Mississippi to the state of Iowa. But if the girls thought that they were almost there, meaning the frontier, they were wrong. Davenport was a metropolis compared to many of the places they had been. There were 8,000 people here at this time. They were building houses like this, which still stand, looking a little tougher with time, but was magnificent back in those times. And they were building houses like this, again, still standing right now. So no, this was not the frontier. This was the gateway to the frontier. The Gardner family was going to have to head in this direction. That's the way it looks nowadays anyway. Back then, it looked something like this. And when I say the Gardner family, I mean this group right here. 4 adults, 4 children, including a little 2-year-old, Albert. Everything in 2 wagons, 2 teams of horses, and the older kids, Abbie, Eliza, Mary, probably all walking next to the wagons. The first leg of the journey northeast was to Janesville, Iowa, a distance of about 130 miles as the crow flies. I should remind you that the maps I'm showing you are modern maps, and virtually none of the places, none of the towns or cities on that map were there at the time when Abbie and her family passed through. Abbie remembers that they traveled through widespread prairies. Settlements became more scattered, villages smaller and more remote from each other. Some days, Abbie said, passed without even a sight of a town. This is Janesville today, pretty small, but back then it was tiny, just a few buildings. But the Gardners were surprised. It had a school since 1850, and believe it or not, a post office since the preceding year. And like most of the small towns along a river, this one the Cedar River, there were lovely trees lining the banks that broke up the monotony of the prairie. Next stop, Shell Rock, Iowa, about 7 miles northwest of Janesville. This is Shell Rock today. It's a pretty little town. Back in 1854, when Abbie was there were no churches, no schools, no store, just a few buildings. And this is where the Gardners decided they had to stay for the winter, because winter was coming on fast. I assume that they found somebody to take them in, since attempting to live in their wagons would have been really harsh. This was their first chance to find out just how dangerous winter in Iowa could be. In March of 1855, the Gardner family was on the move again. They left Shell Rock, pass through a little place known as Nora Springs, basically a couple of buildings, and then through Mason City, which was first established in 1853, had one store and 2 or 3 other buildings, and they moved ahead to Clear Lake, Iowa.
It looked like maybe the family was finally home. They arrived in Clearwater, Iowa, beautiful lake area. You can see it behind me there. And they bought some land and they made a home for themselves, built a cabin on the west end of the lake off in that direction. They had a little farming activity going, the kids were going to school. It seemed like this was the spot.
In the summer of 1855, when the Gardner family reached Clearwater, this was technically the outer edge of the frontier in Iowa. There was not much more to the northwest of here. So this is probably a good time to stop and address the question that Abbie Gardner asked all those years later in the book she wrote. Her question: why did we leave New York, the safety and the happiness of New York, and exchange that for a life of hardship and privations on the extreme frontier? My question is similar but a little more pointed. Did Abbie's parents know that there were people on the frontier capable of extreme violence, capable of killing them? What did they know, and when did they know it? And then, why did they come here with those children? Obviously, Abbie's family knew about the Indians out west. Abbie, in her book, recounts sitting next to her mom in New York while her mom told her stories of their, quote, cruel deeds out west. The Gardners were in Clear Lake for only about 15 or 16 months until the spring of 1856. And during the time they were there, they had a front row seat to some of those cruel deeds that Abbie's mother told her about back in New York. Not long after the Gardners got to Clear Lake, there was an incident where a Sioux killed a 16-year-old Winnebago Indian and severed the boy's head. The government had forced the Winnebagos out of Wisconsin into Iowa and into Sioux territory, and there was fighting going on between the two tribes, with the Sioux being clearly the more dominant and aggressive of the two. As Abbie indicates in her book, about 500 Sioux warriors on horseback came to Clear Lake looking for the Winnebago. They were menacing. They searched one of the settlers' houses looking for the Winnebago. Another incident occurred just a few months after the Gardners arrived in Clear Lake. It involved a dispute between a settler and a Dakota Sioux over a rooster that the Sioux had killed and a piece of grindstone that the Sioux warrior wanted to take. The confrontation became physical, and the Dakota Sioux threatened to shoot the settler. Things were extremely tense. Later, about 25 men gathered together and rode out to the Sioux encampment demanding that they leave. In the meantime, women and children gathered together, barricaded doors to cabins. Abbie's mother told the girls to hide in the deep grass behind the barn, afraid that if the Dakota won, they would all be killed. Much to everyone's relief, the Dakota ended up leaving the area. A short time later, more panic. The settlers around Clearwater heard that there was a group of some 5,000 warriors camped near town preparing to attack the settlement. The settlers left. They all got together and moved about 20 miles east to Nora Springs, to the prairie right outside Nora Springs, and hunkered down, hoping that they could defend themselves. They waited for a period of 3 weeks like that before returning to Clearwater. They returned to Clearwater only after their scouting party gave them the all clear. So the answer to that question is yes. The Gardners knew that there were violent people on the frontier capable of killing all of them. And in the spring of 1856, the Gardners decided to move. They sold their house and land, which probably looked something like this. They bought several yoke of oxen, a number of cows, and a nice herd of young cattle, loaded their wagons, and headed out. Not towards the east, not back to Davenport as maybe you might expect, but instead they headed further west, about 84 miles, to Spirit Lake, where no whites lived at that time. And there was a new passenger on one of the wagons. Mary and her husband Harvey had a second child in March, little Amanda, and she was 3 months old when the Gardner family started their journey to Spirit Lake. And sadly, in about 10 months, the entire family is going to meet this man and his warriors.